and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. This week's episode is a recording of an interview I did at the Everything Electric show in London recently. And before we launch into it, I just want to quickly explain the journey we've all been on here at the Fully Charged show regarding live events. So we've done two this year, one in Sydney and one in London. So far, we're now doing another 1, 2, 3 later on this year. We won't talk about those now. We are. I just wanted to explain something about the kind of cultural texture of the shows, if you like. Put to one side the fact that we did literally, I'm not making this up, literally thousands of test drives at the London show and staggering thousands of test drives at the Sydney show. And these were often people who've never been in an electric car before, ever. And that's the first time they drove it. There were 4 old friends of mine in Australia who all came independently to the show in Sydney and all had to go in various electric cars. They'd never been in them before. They were completely blown away by them. And one of them has already bought an electric car as a result. So, you know, that let's put that to one side. That goes there. All the exhibitors, the amazing people that put on exhibits about the technology you can use in your home, the water heating, the central heating, the energy systems, the control system for all that stuff. Amazing. Incredible levels of interest in that. And we also do our home energy thing, which explains home energy advice center, which explains how these systems work, because it's new stuff. It's still complicated. It's still evolving. Put that to one side. Okay, even let's put the zero carbon kitchen to one side, because that is great fun. The guys from Bosch do amazing cooking demonstrations, and then we go on. So I cooked some, they tasted nice, but they looked disgusting. Beautiful pancakes with Jack Scarlett. And so put that to one side. What I'm talking about is the general mood at the event. And that is something that we, as the people who put those shows on, couldn't create. We couldn't manufacture that mood. That mood comes from, a general public desire of the public. And we're talking tens of thousands of people who attend these events. That is really extraordinary. The kind of the positivity, the desire for positivity, the desire for some sort of hope. In the kind of quagmire of despair that surrounds us in the news feeds, really, more than actual what really is happening in the world. What really is happening in the world is most people, the vast majority of people, are really nice and want to get on with each other and want to tolerate each other and are kind and thoughtful. And then there's this little kernel of vicious, vile people who hate everyone and want to destroy everything. And a huge amount of those people work in the fossil fuel industry. I just wanted to get that dig in while I can. I never want to speak publicly in any way or shape and not have a go at the fossil fuel industry. And last night I insisted that I would have to be critical of the fossil fuel industry for a BBC News programme, and they didn't have me on, which is fine. I quite understand that. I don't care. But I am not going to appear on a major news channel ever and not say something very critical, spiky and nasty about the fossil fuel industry. And if you don't like that, well then don't forgive me, and I don't care. Moving on, what I want to talk about is that mood, because that mood isn't in the show. When I'm like that, when I'm nasty and people say, oh, I love it when you rant. Well, you shouldn't, because it's not good for you or me. Ranting doesn't solve things. Ranting, let's think of some people who ranted. Stalin, Mao, Hitler. Don't really want to be linked with them. Trump, who else? Let me think, there's a lot of them. That bloke in Turkey, looks like he's on the way out, let's hope so. That mood is really uplifting. It absolutely makes it worth our while. The effort that goes into putting the shows on is mind-boggling. The team that put the shows on are incredible. The people who choose all the panelists and organise it all and give us as the people who chair the discussions all the information we need to talk to these people, because many times we've never met them before. And also the wonderful presenters. I mean, Imogen, Jack, and in London we had Elliot there from China. We had Ricky Roy from the USA, Helen Chesky, I mean, God, Helen is incredible. So we've got an amazing team that help us do these shows, and it really is wonderful. I kind of wanted to explain this to people who either don't want to go to live shows, and there's absolutely no compunction for you to, or can't go because we're just not anywhere near where you live. The growth of those shows is extraordinary, and it's something that I genuinely never expected this show to turn into. To these enormous live events with, when we do talks, like, for instance, the talk I'm going to be showing you in a moment, the attendance, it was just jam-packed, the theatre. I mean, this was the first talk we did in the day, so people are still coming in while we're talking to you. So the theatre we were in filled during this talk, which I'm used to, but it must be a bit disconcerting for the guests who've never seen it before. It is really joyous, and this particular talk absolutely exemplifies that notion of the potential for hope, not silly head in the sand, airy fairy fantasy. Oh, the world can be much better. No, really data driven, gritty, down in the weeds, proper, well researched information about, is it possible for us to eventually wean ourselves, the human race I'm talking about, not just individuals, in their houses in England who've got an electric car. That's a start, but literally that's a start. There's a massive journey to go on after that. But is it possible for us to do that? And that's a thing we have to discuss at the moment, because maybe it's not possible. In which case, we're all wasting our time, and let's just give more money to Saudi Aramco, to Putin, to Venezuela, to BP, Shell, Exxon, Texaco, all those people. Just keep giving them more and more and more of our money so that we can burn fossil fuel. That's the alternative that we're facing at the moment. So I want to do everything I can in what remains of my tatty life to reduce by a fraction the amount of money we give those scummy people. Criticize me if you like. And I live in the real world, and I totally understand how incredibly difficult that is. It's not easy, but it's worth a go. And it's really encouraging when you come across someone, and in this case, a book, which gives you just a scintilla of hope. And that's the book, Not the End of the World, by Hannah Ritchie. Hannah Ritchie is the guest we're talking about today. And I'm still ashamed. Look, you can see how much I've read. I haven't got through the whole thing, although there's a lot of notes at the end. So I'm more than halfway through now. Remarkable book, remarkable woman, really worth watching this. And what we've decided to do is, as the talks are quite short at the Fully Charged show, I did it, see. They can't trust me, but I'm not going to edit that. Leave that in. The talks are only half an hour at the Everything Electric London show, including questions and answers. So what we've decided to do is put the podcast that we recorded with Hannah on afterwards. Hannah is extraordinary. This book is an exploration of the challenges that face us around the world, not just in energy, in food, in agriculture, in buildings, in heating our houses, or everything everything and more that the Fully Charged show cover. And she, I just think that it's not fair if your first book, and I'm saying this as someone who's published quite a few books, if your first book gets this review, truly essential, Margaret Atwood. So if Margaret Atwood says your book is truly essential, I don't think that's fair for a man my age who's done what I've done. Margaret Atwood's never read any of my books, and she's never going to. That's kind of unfair. Hello. Eye-opening and essential. I hope people around the world read this book, understand our planet isn't a lost cause, and get inspired to help fix it. Well, that's a nice review. Who's that from? Bill Gates. No, I can't help it. It's just amazing. It is an amazing book. She is a truly, truly remarkable young woman. I just can't overdo it. And there's kind of an embarrassing bit at the beginning, just because you can't help, occasionally you meet someone exceptional and you can't help doing a little bit of reflection on your own life. I'll tell you what I was doing when I was 16, and that is I was working in a battery hen farm in Oxfordshire. not the most intellectually challenging occupation I've ever had. And I will leave it to the recording from the live show to explain the rest. I will join you after that to do a bit of information about what we've got coming up on the Fully Charged show and Everything Electric. But for now, please welcome onto the stage at Everything Electric live in London in 2024, Hannah Ritchie. Like Everything Electric, you'll love our fun-packed Everything Electric expos around the world. Come and join us in Harrogate, or Farnborough and Vancouver. Remember, energy and transport professionals go for free.
So, now, I've done a lot of these to all sorts of people, some well-known, some scientists that aren't well-known. I'm actually quite nervous because it's just to keep up with Hannah is quite a struggle. And I don't want to overly big you up, but just tell the audience, just please, just for me, tell the audience what age you were when you went to university, because it is...
I was 16.
She was 16, ladies and gentlemen, 16 when she went to university. That's all I'm saying. We can leave that there now. We don't need to cover that at all. I'm sorry to embarrass you. So I'm loving the book. I haven't finished it. I've tried to, but it's very...
Robert actually revealed that last night it put him to sleep. So.
I woke up with the book on my nose at about 2 a.m, which is not a good look. But it is amazing. So can you just go back to... Can we just go quickly then through the steps that got you to arrive at what you're doing now? I mean, what you studied and in a sense, your emotional journey as well as the kind of academic one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'm a kid that grew up with climate change. Like, I don't remember really as a kid a time when that wasn't really high on the agenda for me. I was maybe like a bit of an atypical kid that I was thinking about this too early, but I was very much a kid that was very early on very worried about climate change. And I went on to study environmental sciences at university, and I think the anxiety that came with that just increased more, right? I think I was super passionate about the environment, but I think when you enter that environment, you're just bombarded with bad news after bad news after bad news after bad news. And I think I ended up in this position, this very, very kind of helpless, pessimistic position where I felt like really we were kind of doomed and there was really nothing that we could do about these problems because it seemed like everything was going in the wrong direction. And I think one key turning point for me was discovering the work of a guy called Hans Rosling. Now, Hans Rosling is this Swedish physician, and he would stand up and give these amazing TED Talks using data to show how the world was changing over centuries, this really long-run perspective on how the world was changing. And he didn't really cover the environmental stuff, but he covered what we would term as more like human progress, human well-being metrics, like health, poverty, child mortality, maternal mortality. And the issue I had is that I was seeing all of these environmental trends going in the wrong direction, and I was just extrapolating that and assuming, well, of course, everything is getting worse. So, like, hunger's getting worse, deaths from disasters getting worse, life expectancy, like just everything was getting worse. And he really flipped my perspective upside down, because when you look at the long-run data on human well-being, we've made amazing progress over the last few centuries. So, like, just one example, for most of human history, nearly half of kids would die before reaching puberty. Now, that's now less than 5%. So we've made this amazing progress, and that's shifted my perspective that, okay, we've got these massive environmental problems, but maybe we're not completely helpless about actually tackling problems. Yeah. And can we use the progress we've made to put that towards tackling environmental problems? I think that was one of the shifts that's led me to this position of feeling a bit more optimistic about moving forward, and the power of data to understand this. I think you can't get this perspective from looking at the news. You need to kind of step back and zoom out and look at the data to understand what's going on.
Because I just want to quickly check how many people here have heard of Hans Rosling, who've seen his... Okay, so that's good. So if you haven't, it is really worth... I mean, in fact, since we spoke, I actually rewatched his TED Talk, and I'm absolutely with you. It's really inspiring and full of hope, and countering a lot of the assumptions that we assume, and we're also fed by sort of shallow media, I would call it.
Yeah.
But then one of the key things I thought really lifted my spirits when I started reading, but it's right at the early stages. So I'll read the quote. It's that your generation has the chance to be the first generation to actually improve the environment instead of trashing it. I thought that was such a critically important way of thinking about it, because my generation, there's no question, really trashed it. And quite a lot of us here have. And we didn't do it on purpose, and we didn't do it because we hate young people. We did it because that was the way the world that we inherited was, and that's how it worked. But I think that thinking is good. I'm really hoping that there will be a generational shift in thinking about the stuff we dig up or grow, which is everything.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the trajectory of kind of environmental degradation over time, if you go really back in history, like the environmental impact of many populations was very low, right? But you have this kind of trend of like low. It's maybe increasing slightly, and then you get this really rapid rise in environmental impact. And I think we could be the first generation that turns that around and brings it back down. But I think what's really crucial is that I think we could be the first generation that does that while improving human well-being at the same time, right? So the concept I put forward in the book is that we've never really achieved true sustainability, which is providing a good life for everyone while also reducing environmental impact. You kind of have the scales tipping in different directions, where in the past environmental impacts might have been low, but human well-being outcomes were poor. What we've seen over the last few centuries is that tip in the other way. So human well-being has massively improved, but at the detriment of the environment. I think we're in this unique position today where I don't think these two things are incompatible anymore. I think we can continue to improve human well-being across the world while also reducing our environmental impact at the same time. If we can do that, and it's not inevitable that we do that, we need to make it happen. Yeah. But if we do, I think we would kind of be the first generation in history that achieves both.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I think that one of the arguments that you really, because I've felt slightly awkward and uncomfortable about people I might generally agree with, and I'm talking about across the political spectrum, but about things like overpopulation and the fact of the sort of the rapaciousness of free market capitalism. I think that's wrong. We should shrink back. We should do less. And you've really argued against that. I mean, the statistics around population, for one thing, and also the notion of degrowth. So the depopulation and degrowth argument, which bizarrely spans the political spectrum. You can find people on the extreme right and the extreme left who would both argue for one or both of those cases. But you're sort of countering that argument very well.
Yeah, I mean, if you take the overpopulation angle, I think what's really key here and what people don't get, and why I think data is so important to understand these problems, I think people still assume that we're on this trend of, exponential population growth. Yeah. And actually, population growth peaked decades ago, like 1960s.
Right.
And it's fallen by more than half since then. And what we expect, looking at projections into the future, is that the global population will peak this century, and actually the projections are coming forward and forward every year because fertility rates across the world are falling so quickly. So we're currently sitting at 8 billion. We expect probably we might peak at 10 billion. And I think my argument there is that population growth will naturally fall just through economic development, giving women access to education, school, etc. And my point is we should just do that anyway, and you actually don't need the environmental argument to come into it at all. We should just do that because that's the right thing to do. Yeah. And actually, to get to lower population levels than that, you would almost need to force on people this population reduction kind of almost, pushy method.
Like the single child ruling in China, yeah.
And I think one, that would just be socially detrimental, because I don't think you can tell people how many kids they should have, and they should have the right to choose. And second, I actually don't think on the time frames that we're talking about, it makes a dramatic difference to the challenge we're facing, right? We need to provide good solutions for 8, 9, 10 billion people, and I actually think the difference between 9.2 and 10 is just not massive, right? If we have the solutions, 9 or 10 is not dramatically different. So I think that's the key point there.
And then what about degrowth? Because that's kind of, I come out of a sort of hippie background where the fantasy was that you'd live off the land and you wouldn't consume much, and I'd never buy anything new, and I'd always ride a bike, and and that's in a way what got my attention to renewable energy, because that meant you could make your own power man and you could live in your hippie commune and be really cool. until I realized I really needed a bath, and washing clothes is quite nice. Then it changed a bit. But that notion of, you know, that we should shrink down what we do, you know, that holds still quite a lot of things. When I see a 3.5-ton SUV, I think that would be quite good to shrink down that.
No, for sure. I think what's important to note here is that when you're looking at this at a global level, the world needs a lot of economic growth. And it needs a lot of economic growth because we have billions of people living in dire poverty. And it's just actually just not morally acceptable to say, no, you should stop now because there's people in dire poverty. Then you have the question of, in rich countries, should we degrow? And I think, of course, like, I'm also not in favour of the massive SUVs, and I think we could make them much smaller. But I think what is completely true there from the data is that you can decouple these two metrics, right? You can decouple GDP growth from energy use or carbon emissions, and you can do that through innovation. Now, that doesn't mean we go on this growth at all costs model, because if we do that, you know, we'll fry the planet. We can't do that. We need to shift to a completely different model. But I actually don't think that's incompatible with prosperity, right? If we want to do less, then let's focus on how can we do less while providing the same energy services. And actually, decarbonisation and electrification is the best way to do that, right? If you take the example of a car, a petrol car versus an electric car, to drive the same distance on an electric car takes 3 to 4 times less energy, right? Driving the same distance takes 3 to 4 times less energy. So when you're looking at the energy system in the UK, for example, without changing behaviours, without implementing more efficiency improvements, we could cut our energy use by more than half just through electrification
of ground transport.
And then, of course, you can focus on how can we go further than that through behaviour change or through efficiency change. But there's so much waste in the system that we can already do so much while also increasing prosperity at the same time. As I said, we cannot maintain the same model that we've done to date because it will actually be the end of the world. But if we move to a different model, these two things are not incompatible. And I actually think this is really important for how we sell this. I think if we're going to sell this as a let's go backwards, we're going to lose. Right? Every time someone makes this argument, the fossil fuel company CEOs are rubbing their hands because this is perfect for them. People will not choose this over the business as usual model. So if you don't like the more or less framing, just frame it as better. Rather than more, frame it as better. But don't frame it as we need to go back to what we were doing before, because it won't work and it won't sell.
I just want to remind you that they're where they are. I'm just looking for there. So there and there are microphones. If you want to ask Hannah a question, I'll make sure that we've got time towards the end of the session to do that. Because I think it's important that we talk about what you're doing now, because I was just thinking, because quite a lot of the time I'll read a chapter of the book, then I go to Our World in Data, and then that's fatal, because then I'm on that side. So can you explain what Our World in Data is and what your role is within that, and how that came about?
Yeah, so I'm deputy editor of a project called Our World in Data, and we're a website, and we frame it as data and research to understand the world's largest problems and how to solve them. And really what we do there is try to use existing data and research and present it in an understandable way so people can understand what's going on in the world. As we said before, you cannot understand these long-term changes by looking at news headlines. You just cannot get that perspective. You need to use data. And there, when I talk about problems, I'm not just talking about energy or climate or environment. We're covering health, poverty, inequality, all of what we would frame as kind of the world's largest problems, and taking this long-term perspective and global perspective on what does the data actually tell us about whether this problem is getting better or getting worse. Where is it getting better or worse? And what can we learn from different countries to understand what the solutions might be going forward? And our key ethos there is that we make this open access. Everyone should be able to access this data to understand what's going on in the world.
And one of the great examples you used, which really struck home, because I live in a rural area, that my neighbours across the back hedge of my house are cows. And I know the farmers, and I don't eat beef anymore. I used to, but I don't anymore. But the notion that if one of those cows was slaughtered in the field, butchered in the barn, and I took the steak into my house, you know, how much more ecological could you possibly be with meat? And then I eat an avocado that's been put on a ship in South America and sailed across the Atlantic and put on a truck and taken to a supermarket, and I buy it at the supermarket and bring it home. Can you just explain the difference? Because this is what is fascinating about the work that Hannah's doing. It's often totally counterintuitive.
Yeah, I think many of the environmental solutions are actually quite counterintuitive, as they don't really sit with our gut feeling of what is more green.
Yeah.
And I think part of this appeals to this kind of naturalistic fallacy where a cow in a field is obviously much better than a meat substitute that's in a lab, right? The synthetic is bad and the natural is good. But what we try to do is use data to understand, is it actually correct? And in the book, I give various examples of where our gut feeling on this is often wrong. I think why it's important to clarify this is that I think there's so many people that are motivated to act. They're very well intentioned. They just need good information on what they can actually do to make a difference. But the reason, so going back to the beef versus the avocados. So if you look at, I mean, it makes intuitive sense, right? We know that transport emits emissions.
Yeah.
Not as much as others, but we know that transport emits carbon. Therefore, you assume the further something's traveled to reach you, obviously it has a higher carbon footprint. But what that misses is that when you look at the carbon emissions in our food systems, only 5% actually comes from the transport globally.
Right.
So most of the emissions come from land use change, so deforestation and using the land, and emissions on the farm. So that's stuff like fertilizers, manures, the burping cows. That's where the majority of the impact comes from. And then the transport is actually a very small part of that. What that means is that what you're eating matters much, much more than the food miles or how far it's traveled to reach you.
Right.
And unfortunately, when you rank foods based on their carbon footprint, beef is just at the top.
Yeah.
And it's beef, and then it's lamb, and then it's pork, and then it's chicken, and it's fish, then it's the plant-based products. And actually, the increased food mile emissions from those avocados or soy are not big enough for it to offset the emissions from cows. So the cow will be worse than the avocados, even though they're shipped in.
Yeah. It is just, it's extraordinary, because I mean, I think we've all been told, you know, I've been made to feel guilty that, oh, so you're having an avocado and you don't, and you said you care about the environment, you know, and all that stuff. And I just, now I've got something to come back with. I just want to make sure, has anybody got a question that they would like to ask Hannah or bring up? I don't, oh yes, good, there is one. Be very close to the microphone, so that really helps us. Oh, hang on a moment. Try again. No, not yet. Can we, is this mic?
Hello.
Ah, there we go, well done.
Good. Demographic, looking out here, it's rather shiny pates. The demographics of this audience is the problem. When are we going to get younger people, like your good self there, Hannah, and to come here and to work with us to make the world better?
That's quite an interesting question. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons that I can think of in that, you know, the people, our viewership demographic, actually the majority, our biggest audience group are 40 to 50. Well, actually 30 to 50, that's the bulk of ours. And so there's a lot of gentlemen around my age who've got a really good full head of hair. I just want to point that out. They're not all as bereft as I am. But yes, I mean, it is interesting that we don't have hundreds of teenagers, because they can get in very cheaply, or free. So
yeah, it's a good question. I think it's interesting to look at the different demographics of different parts of what we might frame as a energy, climate, ecosystem. I assume if you turned up at a climate protest, there would be more young people there than older people. So, and I think what's really key is actually we find a way of not. I often see this quite a lot in climate conversations, is this kind of jarring fighting between different groups that are all trying to fight for the same outcome. I think what's really important is we try to bring all of these different people together, even though they're possibly interested in different parts of that system, but are all trying to work in the same direction rather than trying to fight with one another. I think I don't have a particularly good answer to why there's this particular demographic. One might be economic.
Yes.
I am a young person. I don't own a car because I probably cannot afford to own a car. I don't own a house because I cannot afford to own a house.
Yeah.
It might be very strongly linked to the people that own a house and could install a heat pump or a solar panel. People that are looking to get an EV, whereas I guess most younger people in the city just don't need a car because they're on a bike or public transport.
Yeah.
So that might be part of it as an economic reason, but like I totally get it. I wish there were far more young people in the room.
Yeah. I mean, and I also think this is a thing that I defend my activities with at my age is that, you know, the people in this hall are you know, I'm certainly not going to speak for all of you, but quite a few of you are in a financial position where you could lease or buy an electric car now. But the one thing that is the result of that is in a couple of years' time, there's some second-hand electric cars, and which there already are now, which are much cheaper. Because when I was, I guess, around your age, if I bought a car, it was fifth-hand. You know, people say, well, it's second-hand. No, second-hand was really posh. Third-hand, posh-ish. Fifth-hand, I could afford it, 300 quid. And then it fell to bits. This is one of the things that we never discuss. Well, I try and discuss. You buy a £300 old petrol car, you will spend thousands of pounds keeping it working because everything will drop off, break, burn out, fizzle off, fray, fall to bits. There's so many bits to go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you there's already been a demographic shift, not maybe in age, but in economics. Like, I think if you were to host this 5-10 years ago, it would be the really, really rich that would come. And because the prices of these technologies are falling, it's going to move further and further down the income distribution, and more people will be able to access it. So I think 5 years from now, I think it will be much more versatile, one in the demographics of age, but also economic class as well. I should also note that it's also very male-dominated. I know that there was you guys did a podcast recently about the lack of women in energy overall, which I've also seen and is troubling.
I mean, we have got, there are, I mean, there'll be women on panels today who work in the energy industry, but it's a target that we really focus on, and and I mean it's not so shown so clearly here. There was one panel we did yesterday where this topic came up, and it is what we know from our very crude data gathering. We're not in the same league as you guys, but was that our viewership on YouTube massively male dominated. It's about 92%. It's improved. Used to be about 98. So we've got a bit
92% still.
92% male. Yeah. But at the live events, it's about a 40-60 split. So there's far more women come to the live events. Yeah. And I made this mistake at Harrogate last year where I said, you know, it's just we have to live with it. We're trying to do better, but we know that it's mainly men that make these decisions. I don't know what, I said something wrong. And I walked out of the hall and this woman grabbed me like forcefully by the sleeve. And she said, I bought the solar panels. I bought the battery. I bought the electric car. He did nothing. And there was this quivering man going, I'm sorry. So you can get it wrong. One of the, yes, it's the data stuff that I think I want to sort of emphasize that or help you emphasize that because it's not, you haven't read 5 articles on Reddit, QAnon, and the Sun and gone, oh, this is what's happening. So you're gathering that data from presumably hundreds of different sources. You're operating on data, not opinion.
Yeah, it's entirely based on data. I think what's really crucial about working with data and trying to answer questions about data, a lot of this stuff I don't know the answer before I come in. I think that's really crucial, right? Otherwise, if you come into it with an expectation of what you want to find, you find the stuff that you want to find. And you can find any study that will support any opinion that you want. So I think what's really critical is that you come into a question with an open mind, that you will accept the answer that the data tells you, whether you like it or not. I think that's really crucial. And where we source the data from, there's a mix of sources. I mean, there's some just like amazing organizations that I should be clear, we don't do the hard work of building the data sets. There's some just amazing organizations and researchers that already do that. The issue the issue that I think we see is that there's so many amazing data producers, researchers, academics doing amazing work. But there's a gap between their knowledge and what they're putting out and how that is translated into the public or policymakers or journalists. There's a gap there. So many of the questions that people have, academics have already answered. The data's there to answer the question. It's just not making it out into the world. So we almost try to work as this bridge and this translator to bring the data and researchers there into an accessible way that people can then understand and use to make better decisions. But yeah, it's entirely based on data and academic research, not on opinion or feels. Yeah.
I just want to make sure, has anyone else got a question that you could bring up that is awkward about the age demographic of the Fully Charged Show and Everything Electric audience? Oh, yes, sir. Well done.
Not so much a question, but a comment. 3 years ago, I was sitting on a beach in Newcastle in Australia with my daughter, and she was having a pretty tough time with anxiety. She was university age, and she said to me that probably 80% of her friends were also suffering similar sorts of anxieties, the sort of stuff you were talking about when you were at university. A lot of them were on antidepressants because of that. They were really struggling in their lives. I was trying to say to her, there's never been a better time to be alive because of the reasons that your book illustrates, but I didn't have the data. You did. I've sent her your book. That's the change you make in the work you do.
Wow.
That's it.
That's wonderful. Wow. That's really good. Thank you. Thank you. No, that is I think we may have discussed this when I spoke to you, but if not, I mean, I had a discussion with my brother before Christmas. He's 3 years older than me. And we have got into our 60s, and we've not been in a war. We haven't had to go. We haven't been called up to fight for a war. Our father was. He was in the RAF. Our grandfather was. He was in the First World War. And our great-grandfather fought in South Africa in the Boer War. So there's 3 generations of men all involved in wars in their youth. And then we've had this long period where, I mean, I know there's been lots of wars around the world. It's not like there's been no wars, but there's not been on the scale of World War II, anything like that. And so we've lived through this, and I felt quite ashamed that I'd only realized that later on and going, oh, my life's been really tough. No, it hasn't. My dad's life was pretty tough.
Yeah.
You know, flying around in airplanes and being shot at was quite...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really easy to underestimate or forget the progress that has been made. I mean, the statistic I gave on child mortality, like, can you imagine a toin cost whether your child survived or not? That was the reality for the entire world. And there was actually economically, you couldn't even buy your way out of that. That was also the same for the richest. It was just child mortality rates were extremely high. And I think what's important to acknowledge about that is that's not undermining the massive challenges that we face today.
No.
I think the point of highlighting progress is to make people understand that we are actually capable of solving problems. I think the issue is that if you assume just everything's getting worse, then you lull yourself into this notion that we can't face any of the challenges that are in front of us. And actually, if you just look at history, it's very clear that you can. I mean, maybe where we are on climate change today, we're looking ahead and thinking this is just such a massive, insurmountable problem. I'm sure people in 1800 were looking at it thinking, reducing child deaths is such an impossible problem. So I think the point of highlighting this progress isn't to say, oh, look, everything's fine, calm down. Yeah. It's to acknowledge that we are actually possible of solving problems when we put our mind to it. And that's the opportunity that we have now.
And I always think dentistry is quite a good, so I'm going to ask for a raise of hands. Who can remember a dentist drill that was driven by belts? Yes. So that is the older demographic. Let me tell the rest of you, they were awful. You know, they were really slow and they really, really hurt. And they were horrifying. When I was a child, I had, you know, dentistry, you just don't even want to think about. In that recently, dentistry now is amazing. When I go and they give me an injection, I don't even know they've done it. And it's just a difference. When they gave us injections in the gums when I was little, it was the size of a fairly big knitting needle that would knit a loose cardigan. So those things have improved enormously. That's another one. Okay, because I was born and raised in a rural area. I now live in one again. It's kind of where I feel comfortable. But one of the things you say, which again I feel is counterintuitive, is environmentally it's better to live in a city than in a rural area.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue here is that when we often think about living in a rural area with your own farm and stuff, I think the point there is that it might have worked in the past because there were 5 million people in the world.
Yeah.
We have 8 billion people, and actually, we can build a sustainable world with 8 billion people, but we can't all live in a rural area.
No.
And I think there's a couple of reasons why cities are better for housing large populations. One, you just need less use for a car. I think the issue with living in a rural area or a suburb is you can't really avoid having a car. And if you look at CO2 emissions per person from transport, and they're much, much lower in dense cities compared to in the outskirts. Stuff like shared heating schemes, right? You can set up very efficient heating programs or power programs within a dense city compared to people being very, very scattered around. And even distribution networks, distributing food or other products, is much easier to do that when people are in a dense setting. Yeah.
Right. We've come to the end. Damn. I just want to, can we just do plastics? We're going to go slightly over, but because I've become sort of slightly obsessed with plastics, but plastic food packaging. It's the other thing. I don't want to do a hands up who remembers belted dentist drills, but I do remember not having anything that I bought in a shop or my mum bought in a shop, or my dad, because he did do shopping, just want to be, that was in a plastic box or a plastic bag or anything, but it was paper or glass was what I grew up as a child. How did plastics get dumped on us by the petrochemical industry?
I mean, people discovered plastics, and why it's been successful, actually, is just because it's an annoyingly amazing material, right? It's super cheap, it's super light, it's super flexible, it's transparent, it's sterile. It has like all of the qualities that you'd want for just a really good material, and that's been both its plus point and also its downside, because it's just so easy and cheap to use now. I think with plastic, I think there needs to be a balance. I think there's obviously negatives. There's plastic pollution. There's potential health impacts of plastics that we don't yet know, and I think we need to know a lot more on. But even from an environmental perspective, plastic does have pros over some of those alternatives, right? We of course, people overuse plastics on food packaging, but it is actually there for a reason. It's to stop the food from going off or wasted, which had an environmental impact. In many products, even cars, we use parts of plastics.
Oh, yeah.
And if we weren't using plastic, that would be much, much heavier because you'd be using a much heavier alternative. So actually the use of plastics massively reduces the amount of energy costs of stuff like cars, or distributing glass around everywhere is super, super expensive. It's super energy intensive. And then plastic can be a good substitute. So there's a good side and a bad side to plastic.
That is I think the perfect ending, because it's all my sort of slightly po-faced hippie-ish anxieties. Plastic's really bad, man. And then you just come out with a really grounded, sensible argument to counter that, which is the perfect ending. I'm really sorry because we have run out. All I can say is, if you can, buy this book because it's absolutely fucking brilliant. And also, when will it come out in paperback? Do you know yet?
Paperback is September.
In September. Yeah. So if you don't want to buy the hardback, you can wait till then. And it's presumably on Kindle reading and
Kindle, yeah. And I spent 2 days reading it in my Scottish accent. So
there you go. So you can listen to Hannah's beautiful accent on Audible and all the other things, and that's really wonderful to talk to you, Hannah. I wish we had an hour and a half. It's gone much too quickly. Please give a really big round of applause for Hannah Ritchie. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed that. I think it was an exceptional event. It was really good. We're going to try and put out more of those in future. Just to explain, what we're going to show now is, and play out now, is the podcast that we recorded with Hannah earlier this year. If you haven't heard it before, it's really worth a listen. If you have heard it before, well, maybe you don't need to, although it might be worth having a quick listen again. And so here we go with the the Fully Charged Show podcast from earlier in 2024 with Hannah Ritchie.
Hannah, thank you so much for joining me today. I have to say that I'm a little bit overexcited about this. Talking to you just because of what you do, and I just want to start out before I wax lyrical about our world in data. Can you explain just briefly how you got to do what you're doing now? Because you're also alarmingly young. I'm allowed to say that because my son is the same age as you. So from my point of view, it's a bit of a shock. Because it feels like, to me, it feels like 6 months ago you were a toddler, because that's what it feels like when I see him, and he's now the same age as you. Anyway, how not like how did you, I know that you were clever and you did homework at school and you went to university. It's really how you got into data, what it was that attracted you to that specific area of science.
I mean, on the topic of like being young, I'm a bit starstruck because I remember you from Scrap Heap Challenge days.
Right.
Like I'd watch you with my dad as a kid, so like I'm
Right.
also starstruck here.
Well, you'll get over that really quickly because you realise what an idiot I am. So it's fine.
But yeah, in terms of my background, so my background's very much environmental science. So my degrees were environmental science. I did a master's in carbon management. I did a PhD, like all very focused on environmental topics. And I guess data was like a part of it, just as it is for like most sciences. But I didn't really kind of dig into like data as a like specific topic or almost career approach until I started working at Our World in Data. And I think that kind of emerged from, in some sense, I'd been almost too close to the environmental stuff, like really getting into the weeds of the really specifics of it. And I think part of that kind of tainted my vision a little bit of like where we were going, were we making progress? And I think you can only really understand these things if you really step back and look at the big picture. And to understand the big picture, you need to look at data. Like headlines are okay, stories are okay, and they're important, but you can't understand how these issues are going globally until you step back and look at the data. And I think that kind of like, I got this kind of wow moment of like, whoa, I feel like I have a much clearer vision just by looking and studying the data, that I kind of started to get obsessed. And now every time I approach a problem, I'm thinking like, give me the data so I can have a look and understand it better.
Right. Because I mean, that is the focus of our show is more on sort of energy and transport, I suppose. But actually, as soon as I read anything about you, I mean, one of the great ones I thought was just so counterintuitive, and I know we all do it. So, and I've done it this morning. I looked at some beans in a supermarket and went, I'm not buying those because they're from Kenya, which in some ways I did feel bad about it because I thought, well, there's a farmer in Kenya that makes his living off these, or her living off growing these beans. And I'm not buying them out of some weird, I should buy more local food. And that I heard an interview with you about that and how, having a lump of beef from the farm next door to your house is more carbon intensive than importing tofu from Australia or something. It was like the most extreme example.
Yeah. No, I think we've all got these like intuitions, and like often these intuitions make sense. Like the intuition that I know that transporting stuff uses energy and emits CO2. Therefore, if it's coming a long way, then obviously it's going to have a high carbon footprint. So intuitively that makes sense. But you only really understand it when you look at the data and you realize that, okay, transport does emit some CO2, but that's really, really tiny compared to the amount that farming emits, like actually producing the food in the first place. And they are producing beef or other meat products has a much higher carbon footprint than producing plant-based foods. And that totally dwarfs the transport emissions that you get, regardless. It's often if it's coming by ship, especially, it just totally dwarfs it. But you don't understand that till you look at the data. So like, I love these wow moments of like, whoa, like my kind of perspective has been flipped upside down.
Because that is, I mean, my children grew up in effectively a vegetarian as opposed to vegan household because my daughter just didn't eat meat. So it was a really easy decision. We eventually all stopped. But then we do live near a farm. So our neighbours have cows. And my wife loves meat. So she's definitely eaten some very high carbon cow. Because I've never liked beef. So that was never a problem for me. But it is such that alone is a contentious debate, which we've touched on occasionally in the show, but I just got, it's not our area really. But what it shows is that there is a sort of vision, which we've all got. I've got it, where you go, oh, there's the beans. I don't want to get them. Well, hang on, look at that. Oh, it's that scale of it. And I just, we've just put out an episode about a grid level battery, a huge Tesla power pack battery that's in near Hull, in the north of England, and it's interesting because it's a grid balancing battery. It doesn't power houses for 24 hours. It doesn't do all it's never meant to. But it's driven. I have to say, I'm going to be sexist. Men livid with fury that anyone would dare to suggest that a battery, even if it's a big one, can run the country. There's never any hint of that in the thing, but it's that sort of assumption that it's what I'm trying to get to is the all or nothing solution.
Yeah.
What we need a battery that can run this country for 4 weeks. This is what someone's demanding, which is like hundreds of terawatt hours. And if you don't have that, then nothing will work. It's that kind of, well, hang on. Because if it's not windy in Cornwall, it probably is around the Isle of Skye or Norway or anyway.
I feel like I think you see that, like, I'm very much in the climate space, but I think you see this a lot where it's either the solution has to fix every single problem at one time, or people disregard it. And the point is we need this wide combination of solutions, and that's how we get there.
But then, so one of the, because it's also that the habit which I am very aware when other people do it, and I'm less aware when I do it, which is cherry picking data. Mm-hmm. So that might, because I'm presuming that you're getting feedback from journalists and people who use your resources, all the time. And and I mean, I could look through your data analysis and go, this proves beyond doubt that electric cars will save the world, which is nonsense. We know they won't. But we can sort of argue that they're a bit better than the combustion cars we use now. I mean, that's really as far as I'm ever prepared to go with electric vehicles.
Yeah, but I think also like a key part of what we do is like we're deliberately not prescriptive about solutions. Like we're never telling people this is what we should do. We're trying to present the data in a way that people can understand, okay, this is the situation. If we did this, this would happen. And then it's up to everyone else to work out, is that actually the path we want to take? Is that the decision we want to make? Yeah. But we're never telling people this is what you should do. But we're trying to present the data in an impartial, objective way to basically inform better decisions.
But I mean, that's in itself is a real challenge in the current climate, because I can't remember it being... I suppose there weren't alternatives. I'm going back way before you were born to when I knew some hippies that built a wind turbine on a farm in Wales. And like there was no one around going, I hate wind turbines, because no one had an opinion about them because they didn't. I mean, that one technically you could argue worked on a very, very crude level, and it charged up some old truck batteries in the kitchen of the house. Because there was no electricity at the house. That's why they did it. They didn't do it to be green. They did it because they didn't have any electricity. Right. It was a long time ago. But I did, there wasn't that sort of angry argument between, I don't even know what it's between, the people who just hate. I've just been I've been receiving a lot of hate recently on Twitter, which I'm trying not to use anymore. About that it just won't ever work, and it's a myth, and we're forcing poor people into fuel poverty by insisting that they all have solar panels. It's this kind of you may not be aware of it, but it's really
I get
horrible.
It as well. And I think and I think so that like striking that balance is really important for us. I think we often know that, or think we're doing a good job if we actually often will see people on both sides using our data to debate the same thing.
That's a good sign.
I think a good sign is if you're getting if people on both sides are like not really 100% happy, then probably you feel like you've got the balance right. Like if you get attacked from both sides, you kind of feel okay.
You're doing something really good. But then there's some really good data about, because I've just written reams of notes, which I just wanted you to reflect on. But then, the changes in the world, when you look at the global map and then how much energy is coming from renewables, how much coal is being burnt, generally, one thing I noticed straight away was Africa is generally hashed out and blank, or the whole sort of sub-Saharan Africa. Is that because you don't know, or because there is no grids and there is no power generation, and I don't know what that seems to be a common theme.
Yeah, generally the data providers that we rely on, often it's just difficult to get high quality data across many low income countries, because because often they're the kind of the network you'd need to gather really good data is not there. Another reason is just that often sadly, energy consumption in those countries is so low, like it hardly even
Yes.
registers, which is
Yeah.
like a big part of the problem. Like,
Yeah.
although my background is environmental science, like what we try to do at Urban Data is present the picture across what we frame as the world's largest problems. And that's like this
Yeah.
really broad combination of, one, yes, we need to tackle our environmental problems and stop climate change, but also like there's really severe socioeconomic problems across the world. So it's how
Yeah.
we do both at the same time. Like, how do we combat climate change? We're also bringing everyone up to a good standard of living. And for many
Yeah.
countries in the world, like energy consumption is so incredibly low.
Yes. Yes. And it's also that thing of which I've had discussions with African people on sort of post lockdown conferences online about electric vehicles in Africa and about renewable energy in Africa. And it does there is definitely an argument that I'm hearing, and I'm remaining neutral on it, in that the cost of now today installing even a coal burning power plant near the coast and running electricity cabling, and pylons and substations out, into a country like Ghana or Kenya or that is so expensive that it's just, they've tried it here and there and it hasn't really worked. Whereas the idea of installing solar locally, and the only example I have is a friend of mine who's an architect who's helped build a hospital in rural Kenya. That was in where there's no grid connection, and they've just made it a grid island standalone power plant with huge amounts of solar and batteries. So it's done as an experiment. Well, it powers the local housing as well as the hospital and all the compound that the hospital's in. And that was affordable and sustainable. And I don't know whether that is something you've looked at, is do we go for gas and nuclear in Africa?
Right.
With all the concomitant costs and infrastructure that's needed, or is it better to miss that, like in a way like cell phones have? A lot of people talk about that kind of combination where putting in copper wires and cell phones are just never going to happen.
Yeah, so there's the effect that they call leapfrogging, whereas you basically just
Yeah.
completely leapfrog a technology. So many people just leapfrog the landline. And the suggestion is that we could just like almost leapfrog coal and fossil fuels. I think just the key point there is cost. Like there's often been this, not by everyone, but this slight hypocrisy, often by rich countries, of like poorer countries, you can't develop in the same way we've developed by burning fossil fuels. And the climate argument there is quite valid, but it's not acceptable in a world when there's energy poverty.
Yeah.
But the key there is that we basically want to have renewables way, way cheaper than fossil fuels. And then you actually don't even need to use the climate argument, because it's just people will do it anyway because it's just economically the best option.
Yeah.
And I think that's very, very feasible. Like I think, so if you look at the price of different energy sources over time, like fossil fuels generally have been quite constant. Like, okay, you get fluctuations in oil markets and stuff, but over time, like the technology, like not very large price changes, especially for coal. And what you've seen for renewables is just these like plummeting costs especially over the last decade, where they're just basically tearing right past coal. So if you imagine coal is just this like flat line, price is not really falling, like the potential is that like renewables are just going to go blow way past it and really undercut it in price. And that's really the hope, is that poorer countries will not have to forego energy because they're trying to cut back on their carbon emissions, because that would be unfair. Basically, they get both at the same time. It gives them energy way, way cheaper, and they don't need to go through the really fossil fuel rich development pathway that we went through.
Yeah. And also, in many cases, having to import it. I mean, that's an argument that does seem to hold sway when I've done public events about energy and transport. If you say, I don't want our country to be reliant on expensive, toxic imported fossil fuel, that does cut across quite a big swathe of political opinion, which is because he's kind of going, I mean, we've really experienced that recently, what the impact that has. It was very much underlined by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I mean, that's changed things.
That's also like another case of, on these issues, like trying to meet people where they are. So like some people are just not convinced by the climate the climate
Yeah.
debate, but there are many other reasons why you'd want to do that. And if their core reason is energy security, then okay, like we're all going then for the same goal. We just have different reasons for pursuing it.
Yeah. But there was a great one which I loved, which was how about land use and how much land you use, because that's a common argument against solar farms, which I kind of sympathise with. You know, we have some solar farms around here in a rural area. There's a massive field that has like grass growing in it.
Yeah.
That has now massive solar array. And in some cases, I've seen it where it does work, where you would never be able to grow anything on that land. So it's just got sheep grazing. But then that, I don't know how damaging sheep are. We'll get to that later on. But the way you set that out was, if you've got a coal burning power plant, it doesn't take up much land in terms of its total use, but it uses a lot of land to get the coal.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't even thought about. You know, that was one of those little quirks.
Yeah, I think that's another case where like you don't understand it till you look at the data. And often people make these arguments about solar and they'll just put up a picture of like a big field with solar panels. And you've got no context. Is that a big area? Like how many houses is that powering? So you only get that context if you look at the data. And then if you look at the data, basically once you include like the land needed for the mining and the transport of the materials and stuff, solar just doesn't really use more land than coal. If anything, if you like utilize it well, so you put it on roofs, like there's ways where you can kind of combine it with farming. You could actually potentially use less land than you would use for coal.
Yeah. Well, there's been a law passed in France literally 2 weeks ago, which stipulates any car park with over 80 spaces has to be covered in solar panels, which is like, yes. Why haven't we done that 10 years ago? What's holding you back? And that, I mean, I'm arguing very strongly for that to happen here, because that land is already stuffed. You know, you're not going to grow carrots on a car park. I mean, why do we need the car park? I think should be the first argument. Can we get around not having the car park? Right. But if we've got it, then at least cover that in solar. But that was, and also all the roofs. I mean, I think that's the thing. There's a couple of journeys we've done where we've actually filmed it, where you're driving past massive warehouses with no solar panels on the roof, and then you go past a field. I know why they put them there. It's investment banks and hedge funds. It's cheap. You know, that's why you put it in a field, because it's much cheaper and you make more money out of it. But it should be on the roof of the damn ugly Amazon distribution center. But then, so have you got any of this to hand? Like how much of our current electricity, I'm going to stick with electricity, comes from renewables globally? I mean, is there an accepted figure for that, or?
So globally, our electricity, so if you just include solar and wind, it's around 10%. So 10%.
Right.
But if you include like low carbon electricity as a whole, so that would include hydropower, that would include nuclear power.
Yeah.
It's just under 40%. So just under 40% of the world's electricity comes from low carbon sources.
Low carbon sources. And that is, I'm guessing, other than nuclear, growing the fastest as well. I mean, there's more of it being installed.
Yeah, by far. So if you look at basically new electricity capacity that's going online, it's like nearly always solar and wind these days.
Right. I mean, because I'm very not opposed to nuclear, other than economically. I mean, that's my argument, but I don't know. I mean, because there's all these, I now want to spend 5 hours burying myself in our world in data. Have you done graphs or breakdowns of the cost of nuclear? Because it has. Okay, here's a question: has nuclear power got cheaper since I was a kid? Because a lot of your figures start from 1966, when I was 10. So it's a really good. It's a really good metric for me. I can go, okay, that's what's happened since I was 10.
So the nuclear story and prices is like a little bit complicated, and also because globally there's just been a big shift in nuclear. So like it used to be Europe and the US were like very heavily invested in nuclear. Yeah. And then basically they've not really, there's a few have come online, but in the last few decades they've basically built no nuclear whatsoever. Yeah. And that's now shifted. So many Asian countries are now building their own nuclear plants. In terms of prices, I mean, so what happens with technologies is that it's what we would call the learning curve. So the more and more you build of the technology, you learn more about it, you learn how to make it cheaper, etc. So that's why we've seen this dramatic decline in solar prices or battery prices.
And
For
wind turbine.
nuclear, because we haven't been building the same plants over and over, we haven't really had that learning. So actually the prices have not really changed much over time.
Right. No, it has. Yes, I mean, it is. It's very difficult I find it very difficult to argue for building. I don't think we should get rid of the stuff we got now. We should keep using it while it works. But it is those things that another thing that is that I've come across more recently, and that's from talking to engineers who work in the national grid and who have to control these things, is I just assume there's a gas turbine power generator, it's on or off because we need it, so let's turn it on. It's not, or coal, those things that they're just, you turn them on when you need them. And nuclear you can't. As one nuclear engineer genuinely said to me, he works at Sellafield, he said, there's two states for a nuclear power plant. Either it's working 100%, which it does all the time anyway, and it's not a problem, Robert, and don't make a fuss, or you're trying to overtake me as I'm running away from it.
Right.
And he's quite an old guy. I thought, well, I could probably just about overtake him, but it would be difficult. But then I find out that, it's not unexpected. I just hadn't thought about it. You have to, a gas turbine power generator is under enormous pressure. What are you doing in it? You're heating water to enormous temperatures, pumping it through pipes, turning turbines. They have to be maintained, and they go offline for months at a time, not a couple of hours. And I didn't know that until more recently.
Yeah, my perspective on nuclear is very similar. Like, I think it's actually quite terrible when we take existing nuclear plants offline, especially when you're like growing renewables at the same time, because then you're basically replacing some of the amazing growth you've had in renewables. You're just replacing another low carbon source when you could have replaced coal or gas or fossil fuels. So it doesn't make sense to take them offline.
So we're basically talking about Germany. So I think we should be
we're talking about Germany. And I wrote an article in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago on this, and it was not that complimentary of that strategy.
Yeah. Atomkraft 9 Danker. It's my generation that in Germany, all of the people I know well in Germany were very opposed to nuclear, really because of Chernobyl. I mean, that was what finally turned the kind of general population against it, because that isn't that far from them. And I was on a bike ride when Chernobyl went ballistic, and I know it wasn't that, but it felt like the rain was hot. It wasn't. It was just that I was freaking out because the wind was like, there was a lot of alarm in the news at the time, because this, and of course the Soviet Union, as it was then, denied anything was wrong for days and days and days. I mean, we know the whole story now, but I mean, that's my argument always been: nuclear power is incredibly safe. If you look at all the nuclear power plants around the world, how long they've been running, it's been incredibly safe and reliable unless it goes wrong. Yeah. And when it goes wrong, it is catastrophically horrendous.
It can be catastrophic, but even if you look at Fukushima, so Fukushima got hit by the region got hit by one of the largest earthquakes it's had, got hit by a massive tsunami. Yeah. No one died in Fukushima. No. And so what we have in our own data is we basically look at how many deaths per unit of energy across different sources, and nuclear is like way down the bottom with renewables. I think my core point there is, if you're arguing like renewables and nuclear are both very, very safe, if you're arguing between them on the basis of safety, like, you're missing the bigger picture. The point is, coal, oil, gas kill millions of people every year from air pollution, and that's what the enemy, so-called enemy, is. It's not one another.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm with you 100%. I can't agree more. And I mean, that is the battle that we are fighting in that sense. Is, I mean, I'm intrigued to hear your take on this, but the kind of underlying, I don't want to call it philosophy because that sounds too grand, but sort of the theme that we're trying to point at is that we stop burning stuff, which is the most stupid thing. I'm under no illusions about how impossible that is to achieve. Even in 1,000 years,
with the most amazing technologies we can't even imagine. I still think there'll be a bit of burning going on. But as a general aim for the human race, it does strike me as being extremely sensible. And it really helps you look at different technologies that are emerging and going, well, that's good. I like that. It's better than the stuff we use now, but it is still burning stuff. So
Yep.
e-fuels, hydrogen, burning hydrogen in a combustion engine. You're going, that it's sort of become the golden rule for us. And I don't know if there's if you have an opinion on that, or if there's some way of analysing whether that is. Are we burning less? Here's a question that you might be able to. Are we burning less now as a human race on the planet than we were 10 years ago?
Than we were 10 years ago? No.
I think we're burning more, aren't we?
We're still burning more. Yeah, I think we're getting very close to the peak.
Right.
I think in the next few years that will peak and it will come down. But relative to 10 years ago, it's still more. But I think as a general principle, like I fully agree. I've recently written a book, which is coming out, and like one of the chapters is specifically on air pollution, and like that's basically
Right.
the tagline is like, if we want to stop, we just need to stop burning stuff. As soon as you burn stuff, you create co-products that
Yeah.
you don't want.
Yes.
So the simple thing is just stop burning stuff.
Yeah. You must plug your book. When's your book coming out and what's it called?
It's coming out next January.
All right.
So it's a while away, but it is
Right.
available for pre-order. It's called Not the End of the World. And it's this optimistic, data-driven look. So it's like, basically, it's my view of the world based on the data on how we tackle environmental problems. So I go through each of our environmental problems chapter by chapter. So like climate, air pollution, biodiversity, deforestation, like chapter by chapter, and look at where we are, how we got here, where we are today, and then what we need to do next to solve these problems.
Right. And that's quite intriguing then. So you are, because you are party and have access to way more data and information than the average Joe, and certainly me. And therefore, I wouldn't be surprised if you said, "I'm so depressed, I'm literally going to give up and grow mushrooms in a cave and carry a gun like the woman in the Terminator." You sound that if you can kind of collate all that information and remain optimistic, then that kind of cheers me up a bit, because there are days when I get up and I go, "Why have I wasted my time arguing this for the last 13 years? It's absolutely pointless. Everything's just got worse, on a bad day."
Yeah, but I think my perspective on that has changed, and it's changed basically because of the data. So if I go back to when I was finishing uni, like maybe 7 years ago or so, like I was very pessimistic. And that's because I wasn't really looking at the data. All I was looking at was basically the headlines, and that's how I thought I would stay informed. And I think that gives you a very negative bias. But actually, when you look at the data, and especially data in only the last few years, so like if you look at the last 5 years, for example, just the pace of change is now so rapid that I find it hard to not be optimistic.
Right. Oh, that's good. That is very good. Because because I'm just sort of waiting, really. I just want to live long enough to see the beginning of the shift that you can really register, i.e., like last year, we burnt more than we've burnt this year, but we've actually produced more energy this year. That moment, because obviously, one of the arguments about this country is, when I was a kid, I think it was about 70% of our electricity was from burning coal. And today it's like less than one. Occasionally we do, but it's very, very low. But also, when I was a kid, we made loads of stuff in this country. We were a huge manufacturer of, things like rail tracks, trains, bridges, aeroplanes, cars. We made all that stuff here. Well, we've shipped all that to China, where they burn coal.
But I think that's another also big misconception. Good. Yeah, I've got some good news on that. So like it's right if you look at like CO2 emissions in the UK over the last few decades, like they've basically halved. Like there's been a really rapid plummet. And like a lot of that has been this rapid decline in coal production. And the argument is always, and I agree, and like I would have made this argument as well, is that like, okay, the UK is actually probably just carrying itself on. Like there's no way it's actually reduced emissions. It's just like exported them and it's been like, okay, it's someone else's problem. But we can correct for that like offshoring. So we can
Right.
calculate what would the UK's emissions be based on the fact that not only looking at how much we produce in this country, but all of the goods that we import. Like basically we're saying, okay, we're also going to add all of these emissions of the stuff we import from China or India or Bangladesh. And when you do that, emissions are higher than our domestic emissions because we
Yeah.
are importing stuff. But we still see this dramatic decline over the last few decades. So it's
Right.
not that we're just offshoring them. That's a little bit of the story, but we're still rapidly reducing emissions.
I mean, I'm now projecting, and correct me, please, but I'm just thinking that mechanical efficiency since I was born has improved enormously. So the press that would have pressed the bonnet of a Mini when I was a kid would use more energy than a press that's in a factory now. And that's just one example. And the way the steel comes from would be more efficiently made and how it's shipped.
Mm-hmm.
So, and is that what am I correct in those assumptions that in fact the manufacturing processes are less energy demanding now than they would have been 50 plus, all right, 60 years ago? I have to be honest about my age.
Yeah, so you can reduce your emissions in two ways. One, you can reduce the amount of energy you're using, and as you say, that's improving the efficiency. Or you can decarbonize your energy supply, so reduce the amount of CO2 you emit per unit of energy. And
Right,
actually, both of those have massively improved over the last few decades. So they
right,
both levers are pulling in the right direction. So you're getting that combined effect of the processes are more efficient, and
right,
the underlying energy we're using to power them is also getting cleaner.
right. Yes. I mean, and I mean, that's the big argument really for electric cars is always the argument of, oh, well, it's powered, it's used more in America. Your damn Tesla's powered by coal,
Right.
but it's still cleaner,
Yeah.
isn't it, per mile or per kilometer?
Yeah.
But also it doesn't have to be powered by coal. I mean, when it was an American that explained the term fuel agnostic to me, is that an electric car works with electricity from anything, doesn't care where it comes from. If it's electricity, it'll work, whereas a combustion engine, not quite the same. But now that is very encouraging. I want to ask you other ones that I think, okay, so what about, have you done shipping oil? Because, okay, so in my weird career, I've been on two very large ships. One was a container ship and one was an oil tanker. And this is way before Fully Charged Show. This was how do they do it? I don't think it's on YouTube, but there was a long-running TV series, and all I can remember from talking to the captains, and this program was so not about a critique of the oil industry, anything but the oil tanker was just massive. It was just so big, this was just in a dock. It was being unloaded in Pembrokeshire. And I asked how much fuel it used. It was one of the long list of questions. And they don't measure it in gallons, they measure it in tons. I can't remember what it was, but it was a lot. All I can remember is it was more than a way bigger ship that was a container ship. Because the oil tanker, when it's full, is incredibly heavy and it sits really low so it's got to push more water out of the way. I don't know if you know. And it is about 40%, from what I understand, about 40% of global shipping is moving crude oil. Does that strike you as a plausible figure? I'm asking you these really difficult questions. Very unfair.
No, it's I mean, I don't have the numbers to hand. I mean, it doesn't seem impossible to me that that would be the amount. I think there again, I always just try to think about the data and put it in perspective.
Yeah.
And what just pops out for me is that when it comes to transport emissions, the vast, vast, vast majority come from roads.
From ground transport.
From
really?
ground
Wow.
transport.
Wow.
And it's not that we don't need to address, we obviously need to address shipping and aviation and stuff, but I think we often get pulled in so many different directions when there's often, you can get 80% of the way there by focusing on the big chunks. I often see this a lot, even when people think about their personal carbon footprint. People can get really obsessive about trying to totally optimize absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's stressful, or a lot of people just don't have time and it seems overwhelming. But actually, there's a couple of just core, maybe 5 or so big decisions that basically account for 80 90+% of your carbon
Right.
footprint. So that's where the focus of your energy should be.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's I'm guessing top two, ground transport and meat.
Yes. So like as an individual, the biggest things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint is, one, move more towards a plant-based diet.
Right.
To either get rid of your car, or if you can't get rid of your car, switch to an electric. There's just obviously like massive benefits from moving to an electric car. And then the other big one, if you fly, is flying less.
Yeah.
And then in the home, like heat it. Like one is like you could try and produce your own energy by installing solar panels. For a lot of people, that's not feasible. Like I live in a flat, I can't install a solar panel. And then the other one is like, especially in the UK, is heating. So like insulation, and thinking about heating, and that gets you nearly all of the way there in terms of a carbon footprint.
Right. That is interesting, isn't it? Because that's what I've just been. We've just been discussing whether we should review yet another big, heavy electric SUV. I'm not going to mention the manufacturer because it just feels like, it looks amazing. It's a new one that hasn't come out yet, and we're going to go and see it. And it's like, but from what I can gather, what you're saying is, because I've got a real bee in my bonnet about big SUVs in cities.
Yeah,
I know I'm not alone in this. But it's just like the utter ridiculousness of it is just it just seems to get worse. You just think, why? And people are still buying them. Far more people buy large SUVs than buy electric vehicles. That's the horrible basic truth. And I'm talking combustion one. So actually, what you're saying is, what I'm taking from what you're saying is, it is worth us reviewing a big, heavy, new electric SUV because it's electric. So if the stupid idiots that were going to buy a petrol Range Rover or an Audi Q8 stupid 3-ton thing to drive one kid to school, it's actually better that they have an electric one still, even if it's a big tank. That's my argument. It doesn't really hold up very well.
Yeah, if someone's determined to get an SUV, then by far, but like, and that's a motivation, then they should get an electric one for sure.
Yeah. Because there's so many other topics, I just want to make sure. Yeah, there was one of your graphs I couldn't quite understand, which was global coal consumption, and I wrote it down. So coal produces 2,509 roughly terawatt hours a year. It was annual coal production, but it said changes. Have I got the graph here? I might need to read it to make sure, because I don't expect you to remember all these things. Where is that one? Because it was like a bar graph with annual. No, that was nuclear. Cool, there it is. So 2021 is as far as it goes up to. So the world annual change in coal energy consumption shown is the change in coal energy consumption relative to the previous year measured in terawatt hours. So it looks like it's a horrific increase from 2021, which looked like it was a huge decrease. I just got a bit confused about that one. I'm getting obsessed with one thing. It's probably a mistake, but
no. So so coal globally has gone up year by year and is still increasing. The big thing you need to be aware of there is that it's a COVID year. So basically that's showing you the change relative to the previous year. So the numbers for 2021 are showing you the change relative to the amount of coal we were burning in 2020. And our coal consumption fell a lot in 2020 because of COVID lockdowns, especially in China, for example.
Yeah.
So you see that almost half of the change or the increase came in China in that year.
Right.
So I think in general, I'm a little bit wary. So if you looked at the change from 2019 to 2020, you see a massive reduction. So the actual change, if we skip the COVID year, was much, much less. I think I'm very wary of using like just year-to-year changes for a lot of things because there's often a lot of noise. I think what you want to do is often look at, okay, how has it changed in the last 3 years, for example?
Right, or last 10 or whatever. Yeah. Because I mean, that is the actual amount of energy we use, because that's a really difficult one, isn't it? I make that mistake all the time, talking about energy when I'm actually when I mean electricity, because there's the vast amount of energy we use is not electricity. Am I right in that? It is well, presumably it's for heat and for industry, so it's gas and coal are the kind of massive quantities of energy that we produce for heat.
Yeah, so electricity is just a subset of energy more broadly. So
Yeah.
I generally think about it in three buckets of energy. So one is electricity, the other's like heating in industry,
Yeah.
and then the other one's transport, which is predominantly oil. And
Yeah.
electricity is a small component. What I
Yeah.
think people need to be a bit wary of, like I think it can be easy to get like very pessimistic when you look at the share of renewables, for example, in total energy consumption.
Yeah.
Often looks very, very small. But what we're not including or not taking account of there is that a lot of the big fossil fuel chunk and transport and heating, for example, a lot of that is just waste.
Yes.
So it's not that. So say, how do I explain this? So say we look at our total energy production and it's 100 terawatt hours. Let's just
Yeah.
say, and renewables is only 10, for example. People assume, oh, that renewables has to get all the way up to
Up to
100.
100. Yeah.
And it doesn't need to get all the way up to 100. It's much, much less than that, because once you get rid of the fossil fuels, you basically get rid of the waste. And now, fossil
Right.
fuels, often that conversion process is you're losing like 2/3 of it to heat. So actually,
Yes.
the amount you get in the end is only a third. So the amount
Yeah.
you do not need to scale renewables from 10 to 100. It's more like 10 to, I don't know, 40, for example.
Right. I mean, there is a really good analogy with electric vehicles, because I grew up with combustion engines and was obsessed with them as a kid and as a young adult. And when I understood the efficiency, and that was with two engineers from Honda who were showing me this incredible 3-cylinder, the kind of the ultimate combustion engine. And it was running in a laboratory, and it's standing right next to it. It was just going, and of course, it had to have an exhaust pipe that went out of the room, otherwise we'd all die. But put that aside, they were so proud of this engine. It was this beautifully balanced engine that was 33% efficient, and that was like amazing. It was like it punched the air.
Mm-hmm.
Have a medal because it's 33% efficient. And I stood there looking at it and I going, well, what's the engine in my car, my Volkswagen Golf, or how? And they went, oh, like 20, 26, 25, 26%. And I went, does that mean, in literal terms, every pound or dollar I buy petrol for that I put in that car, that when I only 25p moves me along? And they went, actually, it's probably a bit less that moves you along. And you then go, that is good. So 30, and then you look at an electric motor, which the rubbish sort of Victorian electric motor, about 80% efficient.
Yeah.
The modern ones are up in the 90s. And you go, so what that then equates to is, to replace the entire global energy fleet, we'd need this much energy, which is what we use now.
Yeah.
And you go, no, we don't.
No, we need way less than that.
We need about a third of what we use now.
Yeah.
Because a petrol car goes about 420 meters on a kilowatt hour. And I've got a Tesla, which is not a small car, but it's quite efficient, does 4.5 miles on a kilowatt hour. So that's the difference. It is colossal. And a good car, a proper efficient car, which is what we should be using, the Aptera in America, which is amazing, 7-8 miles to the kilowatt hour. That's what we should be aiming for.
Yeah, there's a interesting chart. I think it's on the US Environment Protection Agency website, I think. But they basically plot the average miles per gallon of different car manufacturers over time. And you see there's very small improvements. And then Tesla enters the chart and it's basically on another level.
Yeah.
This just way, way, way above. And of course it's not the same of miles per gallon, but they do an equivalent.
No. Yeah.
And the reason that Tesla is just off the charts is because it only makes electric cars. So it's basically comparing what's the difference between a gasoline car and an electric car in terms of what you'd expect as a mile per gallon, and it's just completely off the chart.
Yes. What about the last thing I'd love to ask you about is recycling, because that's become it's critically important. So we've recently done an episode about how Apple are recycling their stuff they make, and they're now industrializing their recycling processes and refining them. Because, and I didn't even know that they've got to, in the next 10 plus years, they've got to recycle 2.24 billion iPhones. That's how many they've sold. So in 10 years' time, that they'll all be pretty much redundant. But what they plan to do by 2025, this is what they've said, and they told us we can say it, and we said it in the episode, is that by 2025, all the cobalt they use, because they will still be using cobalt in their batteries, unlike cars, all the cobalt they use will be recycled. They will not extract any more cobalt ever for any of the products they make. And then they want to then step up to nickel, to chrome, to all the other products they can do, because they've made so many phones that they can actually produce them at that rate at the moment. I mean, they're already stripping out that stuff and using it in their new products now, but they're saying that by 2025, it will be 100% of the cobalt they use will be pre-dug up, that's going to have an impact. I mean, I can't imagine what impact that has, because it requires a lot of energy to recycle that material.
I mean, that's interesting. That's something to hold them to if they've claimed that by 2025 they'll do that.
I'm going to remind them.
The problem with recycling is I mean, there's probably some where the processes are like not yet quite optimized or like not really there, but for a lot of them the processes are there, like it's technically possible to do. The problem basically just comes down to economics of often these minerals are like so cheap to extract, often like in some well, actually in a lot of cases, because the social conditions in the supply chains are so poor, but they are very, very cheap to extract, and often the recycling process, because we've done it very, very low volumes and we haven't got the scale, is very energy efficient and costly. So the economics are just not there to actually push companies to recycle, because they can do it way, way cheaper. It's just going to increase their costs.
Right.
But in terms of minerals, like I think a lot of people are concerned that we'll run out of a lot of the minerals that we'll need. Like there's no really indication of that.
No.
But recycling would go a long, long way. So I mean, it's only a positive. If big companies like this are making, I mean, that's ambitious. That seems very, very ambitious to me.
It does.
If they're making that claim, then that sounds very positive.
I mean, the only thing I can say is from being in the place, the kind of facility where they were doing this, and I mean that the machine we saw, which was going with iPhones that quickly, that can only do 2.5 million a year. So they've got another one in Austin, Texas, that can do another 2.5 million. They need them that can do like 20 million a year. Just to catch up. I mean, it's on a scale that, because they're such small items individually, so you then got to think, oh well, then that's because what's the material in? There is like a micron of rare earth metals. I didn't know the thing that goes zzz in your phone is actually a rare earth metal in a tiny little tube. We saw it. It's like that. It's minute. And one of those is like you would sneeze and you'd never find it. But when you've got 20 million of them, that's a big lump. It's like lumps of gold and silver and nickel and cadmium, and it's huge amounts of materials, which is quite intriguing just to think, to scale it up to things like electric cars and buses and trucks.
Yeah.
Eventually, when you do have to, we've got to do something with it. We can't, the sort of Jeremy Clarkson term that was, which was in 3 years you'll throw this battery into landfill. He said that there's tens of thousands of people who still believe that.
Mm-hmm. But I think it could move quite quickly, and one reason for that is that we discussed earlier that one of the potential drivers away from fossil fuels is that this energy security component, and a lot of people have tried to push against that and say, well, you're still going to be relying on country X, like they always use China, because they produce or they extract and refine the minerals that you're then going to need. So I think even partly at the company level, but also at the national level, there probably will be this push to recycle, because that almost gives you this like self-sustaining loop where you don't need to continually rely on countries that have the minerals to produce more. Like you basically want to be able to recycle your own stuff and then reproduce the same stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, just to kind of wind up, what are your predictions from the point of view of successful technologies? I mean, you've already kind of implied that wind and solar are fairly successful. What about things like energy storage? Because that is, all the sort of renewable maximalists, I'll call them, that I know, who I generally agree with, but I'm always there's a little bell going off in the back. I'm going, that's a lot, which is, and that is the sort of tripartite solar, wind, storage. Those three things. It makes sense. I can understand that on a very basic level, but the level of storage that we'd need, and then they talk about distributed storage and vehicle to grid systems and all that. And yes, it's still, there is an element of the Dunkelflaut, which is do you know that term, the German?
No.
Oh, it means it means 2 weeks of dark, cold, still weather. There's no sun, no wind, and it's horrible. It's a German winter, which we have as well. Das ist ein Dunkelflaut. Which is where renewables just collapse, and you go, how on earth are we going to keep going through that period?
I'm probably going to make the case nuclear can be very useful. I think nuclear and solar and wind alone don't go well together because you can't ramp up nuclear. But with sufficient energy storage, like that mix can actually work. Like nuclear, energy storage, solar and wind can feasibly work. Hydro's people just completely forget about hydro. Like hydro's our biggest renewable energy source.
Yes. That graph, sorry, just to quickly say, that graph about hydro, I didn't realize how way ahead that is of everything else. So there's a great graph over the last 40, 50 years where solar doesn't exist, wind barely exists, but there's a bit of hydro. Even when I was a kid. So Dinorwig was built when I was a kid, and hydro dams were around, long before I was born. But then the hydro grows at such a rate. And then only more recently, we've seen this really sharp increase in solar and wind. Sorry, yes, it's just that I'd forgotten that graph.
Yeah, so I think solar, hydro's not growing super quickly, and I don't think it will grow at the rate that solar and wind will, because it's just not as scalable. But I think we should maintain a very large hydro supply and actually increase it in locations where it's suitable. And then, we're not going to get away from the fact that we just need very large energy storage, and we're going to need to build it at a scale and speed that we've just never done this before. But I think it's feasible. I think in terms of, I'm not concerned about mineral requirements. Like, we have enough. The bottleneck is production capacity, like basically now. I'm not the price trends are all very much going in the right way. Like the price of batteries has just completely plummeted. And I expect will continue to get cheaper as these products develop. So I think all of the trends are moving in the right direction, and I think it's possible. Undeniably it's a massive challenge that we haven't done before. But I think they are I often get this, people often make the case of, my country's so small, it emits so little, what's even the point of it? All of our emission savings get dwarfed by, I don't know, 1 year of China's emissions.
Or America's energy consumption.
But,
I just want to bring the Americans in on this.
Throw them under the bus.
But it's an electric bus.
So that's a very common argument, but I think the key thing there is even beyond the actual emissions reductions, we basically need completely new models of how to do things, and we need exemplars of how we do it. And any country can set the example of, this is actually how you decarbonize your electricity, and these are the combinations that work. And yes, other countries might need to do it on an even larger scale, but these are the combinations that work. It is actually possible to do this. And that's how I see also, for example, Norway with electric vehicles. No one knew that you could get basically all of your new sales of cars to be electric until Norway did it, and now no one can use the excuse that you can't do that. So I think there's just loads of learning to be had, and small countries can even play a big role in there in setting an example of how to do it.
And I'm sure you would agree with this, that one of the things that keeps me going with this whole daft thing, the fully charged I'm talking about there, what the hell are you doing this at your age? You should be lying down in a corner doing a bit of gardening. But what is the
the excitement of the new technologies that are emerging, and not only the new technologies, new business systems, the software, the new way that things join together and talk to each other. There's a huge array of new ideas that have emerged in the last 10 years that they would have been inconceivable 20 years ago. I mean, the fact that this house now, there's a car behind me that's charging 100% from solar panels.
Mm-hmm.
I've done the whole stupid thing, gone the whole hog. So I'm 100% electric. We haven't used any grid electricity now for about 22 days, none at all. And we're 100% electric, cooking, heating, hot water, cars, everything. So it is not possible for the whole year, but it is, it's grossly unfair from a kind of macro socioeconomic point of view that someone in my position doesn't have to pay for electricity for about 6 months of the year, or petrol. So someone like you who lives in a flat and has to use a car, so uses a petrol car, is spending way more to maintain that than I do. And that's clearly wrong.
It's clearly wrong, but it's also that the early adopters, so the people that adopt electric vehicles early, adopt solar panels early, they're making those technologies cheaper for the rest of the world. Yeah. And that's where smaller countries can play a role if they invest in these technologies. They make it. I mean, we were talking earlier about people that literally have almost no energy at all because it's too expensive. And the point is that we just need to make these technologies really, really cheap, and the early adopters massively help in that.
But it does. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm trying not to go over an hour, but it's because I'm afraid I could grill you with the really ridiculous questions for at least 4 hours, but I'm not going to do that. But it does give me a fingernail hold on the cliff of despair. Hope that you are essentially someone of your generation who's grown up in the world you've grown up in, which has been fairly challenging. Isn't completely pessimistic and is, can see that there is possibilities.
And I think that the way I like to clarify that is it's not like some blind optimism or complacent. It's definitely that I'm saying, hey, everything's fine. We can just let things continue. It's actually the opposite. Because I see this stuff moving so quickly, it makes me more optimistic and driven to do more. I'm like, guys, look what we're doing. We can do this bigger. We can do it faster. If anything, the optimism for me drives more action rather than the pessimism, which almost I kind of sit in despair. So for me, it's this very, very active, driven optimism.
Yeah. That is a beautiful note to end on, Hannah. Thank you so much. That was I can only apologise for my fluffy, rambling questions because you're very, very clear in your answers and your understanding. I can only feel a certain amount of shame.
No, I love the conversation. I loved it. Thank you.
Very good. No, it's been really good. Thank you. And please I need to talk to you again with far more structured questions.
I'm very happy to come back anytime.
Very good.
Thank you.
Please support our Stop Burning Stuff Patreon and help us to tackle misinformation about electric vehicles and clean energy.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed that. It was an amazing privilege to talk to Hannah. She really is extraordinary. Keep hearing her on podcasts from all over the world. She's knocking it out of the park. Let's say that the next live show is in Harrogate. And to be honest, it's one of the most beautiful locations we do live shows in, and we do them all over the world. But this one is exceptionally beautiful. If you're in there, if you're north of Manchester, I think that's the north. A load of people have told me that's not north. Harrogate is down south. It's in Yorkshire. Anyway, it's a beautiful place. If you can come along to it, it's great. It's quite a smaller, it's like a beautiful village fete with test drives. Imagine going to an amazing village fete where there are literally hundreds and hundreds of test drives available through the beautiful Yorkshire Dales and everything like that. Electric vehicle test drives. There's amazing exhibits and there's great talks. And last year there was lovely ethical ice cream. I can't remember. There was some lovely food there. It was great. Really nice event. And last year we were really blessed with the weather, and we're hoping that will be repeated this year in Yorkshire. Nice weather. Anyway, that's all. Please, there's some great episodes coming up, but I'm not going to go on about them. But I know there's some amazing stuff we've recorded. And thank you to all the Patreon people who support this show. And thank you for watching, and thank you for subscribing. Our subscription numbers are fascinating. They go up and down. They do go down sometimes, not by many, but occasionally I'll check it and it's gone down by like 25 people. That's fair enough. Who wants to subscribe, unsubscribe or whatever, they do. It's always done that. But it is weird when you see it. And then the next time you look, it's gone up by 500. So please do subscribe. That's probably a good thing, I should say. And so because then you'll know when we put stuff out. That's one reason for doing it, because there's a huge variety of shows that we put out. And we've just been featured in the Sun newspaper in England, which is a kind of massive event. I can't say privilege, but it's good that they've positively referred to this show. They couldn't quite do the whole thing. They call us fully char. So if I go like that, I can't do it. I'm such an idiot. That way round. Fully char. I can't get my hand in the way. I'll use Hannah's book. It's that. Welcome to the Fully Char Show. The Sun. That's all. I better shut up and go away. If you have been, thank you for watching/listening.